In 1957, a sociologist at the University of Michigan sat down with 400 families living in a new suburban neighborhood outside Detroit and asked them one question: how many of your neighbors do you know by name? The average answer was 29. He ran the same study in 2019. Same question, same type of neighborhood, same region. The average answer was 4. Something changed between 1957 and now. Not the houses, not the lawns, not even the people. Something structural changed, something built into the way those streets worked, and most of us have never stopped to name exactly what it was. By the end of this video, you will be able to name it. And one of the things that changed is something you can actually bring back, starting tonight. I will tell you which one near the end. Picture a Tuesday morning in June of 1954. The neighborhood is Levittown, Pennsylvania, one of the largest planned communities ever built in the United States. 17,000 houses, 70,000 people, all of it built in under 4 years on what had been a potato field. It is 7:15 in the morning, and the smell coming through the screen door of number 42, Primrose Lane, is Folgers coffee and white bread toast. The Philco radio on the kitchen counter is playing Doris Day. Outside, 3 houses down, a lawnmower starts. By 8 o'clock, the block looks the same as it does every morning. The fathers have gone. 43 cars backed out of 43 driveways and turned left toward the highway. The street belongs now to the people who stayed. And what happened on that street between 8 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon is the thing nobody makes documentaries about. It is the ordinary machinery of a neighborhood that actually worked. And it worked for reasons that were partly designed, partly accidental, and almost entirely gone. The first thing that made a 1950s neighborhood feel different from the street you live on now had nothing to do with values, or community spirit, or some lost sense of neighborliness. It was architecture. The houses in Levittown, and in nearly every suburban development built between 1945 and 1965, were built with front porches, not the shallow decorative ledges you see on houses today. Real porches, 6 feet deep, wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table, oriented to face the street. This was not an accident. The developers who built these neighborhoods were working from a template that went back to the late 1800s, when porch design was considered a civic technology. A porch that faced the street put people in sight of each other. It made the act of being home public, at least partially. You could sit on your porch and watch the world go by. The world could see you watching. Urban planning researchers at the University of Illinois studied this in 1993 and found that residents of streets with functional front porches reported knowing an average of 6 more neighbors by name than residents of streets. Where the garage dominated the front face of the house, 6 more people, from a design choice made before the foundation was poured. But the porch was only the first layer, because the porch only works if people are using the street itself. In 1954, the street in front of your house was not primarily a place for cars, it was a place for people. This sounds obvious, until you try to find a street in America today where children play unsupervised in the road, where adults stand and talk for 20 minutes without planning to, where the physical surface of the street functions as shared public space. In most American suburbs built after 1980, that does not happen. The street is infrastructure for vehicles. You cross it to get somewhere else. In the 1950s suburban street, something different was true. The traffic volumes were low because most families had 1 car, and that car left with the father in the morning and did not return until evening. For 8 hours a day, the street belonged to everyone else. Children played stickball in the road. Mothers walked to each other's houses rather than driving. The physical experience of living on a block included the block itself as usable space. Jane Jacobs, writing in 1961 inches. The Death and Life of Great American Cities, called this condition the sidewalk life. She argued that a neighborhood's sense of safety and belonging was generated not by any policy or program, but by the simple fact of eyes on the street. People present, people visible, people knowing without being told who belonged and who did not. The 1950s suburban street had this almost by accident. 1 car per family, combined with the front porch design and the daily rhythms of a single-income household, produced exactly the condition Jacobs was describing. Therefore, the question worth asking is not why people in the 1950s were friendlier. They were not necessarily friendlier. The question is why the street gave them so many more chances to demonstrate it. There is something in the data from that 1957 University of Michigan study that almost nobody talks about. The sociologist who ran it, a man named Herbert Gans, published his findings in a book called The Levittowners in 1967. He spent 2 years living in the community before he wrote a word. And the thing he kept returning to was not how many neighbors people knew, it was where they met them. 81% of the close friendships formed in Levittown between 1958 and 1960 formed within a 3-house radius of each front door. Not through work, not through church, not through any organized activity. 3 houses. The physical proximity of where people slept was the single strongest predictor of who became friends. Gans called this propinquity, a word borrowed from Latin that simply means nearness. And what he found was that propinquity was not something people sought, it was something the neighborhood created for them. The layout of the streets, the placement of the porches, the shared driveways, the mailboxes clustered at the corner rather than mounted individually, all of it was producing social contact without anyone trying. The thing that changed between 1957 and now is not that people stopped wanting neighbors, it is that the infrastructure for accidental contact was quietly removed. But there is a third element, and this one surprises most people who hear it. If you drove through a 1950s suburban neighborhood on a Tuesday afternoon, you would find 2 things within walking distance that you will not find in most equivalent neighborhoods today: a pharmacy with a soda counter and a 5 and dime. These were not just retail stores. They were what sociologist Ray Oldenburg, writing in 1989, called third places. Places that are neither home nor work, but a third kind of space, where people gather without agenda. Oldenburg spent decades cataloging what third places actually do for a community, and his conclusion was blunt. Without them, community does not form. It cannot. People need a physical location with no entry requirement and no time limit, where showing up is enough. The Rexall drugstore on the corner of a 1950s suburb was that place. You went in to buy aspirin and you stood at the counter for 12 minutes talking to someone you had not planned to see. That conversation was not incidental to community life, it was community life. Between 1960 and 2000, more than half of America's independent pharmacies closed. The soda counter disappeared first, then the stores themselves, replaced by drive-through chains on arterial roads that required a car to reach. The errands that once generated accidental conversation became isolated transactions. The result was not that people got unfriendly. The result was that the occasions for unplanned contact were systematically eliminated from daily life. And without those occasions, the 29 neighbors became 4. The last piece is the one that sounds most old-fashioned and is actually the most recoverable. In 1954, a suburban neighborhood had a rhythm, not an agreed-upon rhythm, not a policy, a natural one that emerged from shared circumstances. Fathers left at 8, children left for school at 8:30. The remaining adults, almost entirely women in that era, entered a loose, daily schedule that produced consistent contact. The morning walk to the mailbox, the mid-morning coffee across the back fence, the afternoon errand to the corner store, the 4 o'clock gathering of children returning from school, which pulled adults outside almost automatically. These were not traditions anyone had decided to maintain. They were byproducts of a shared schedule. When everyone in a neighborhood operates on roughly the same daily timeline, the chances of unplanned overlap multiply. That shared timeline is gone now. Dual-income households, remote work, staggered schedules, online shopping that eliminates errand trips, all of it has desynchronized the neighborhood. You and your neighbor might both be home all day and never be outside at the same time. The overlap that used to be inevitable is now improbable. A team of researchers at MIT published a study in 2021 measuring this directly. They tracked the GPS data of 1,200 residents in 4 suburban neighborhoods and found that 2 neighbors living 4 houses apart had a median of 2 minutes of shared outdoor time per week. 2 minutes in a week. In Levittown in 1958, Herbert Gans estimated that number was closer to 40 minutes, not because people tried harder, because the structure of the day made it hard to avoid each other. Here is the thing worth sitting with. The 1950s neighborhood did not produce close-knit community because the people were better. It produced it because 3 structural conditions were present simultaneously: the porch facing the street as shared space rather than vehicle infrastructure, and the third-place economy within walking distance. Remove any one of those 3 and the whole system weakens. Remove all 3, which is what happened between 1960 and 2000, and you get the neighborhood most Americans live in now. Houses on a street, neighbors whose names you do not know, a life that takes place almost entirely inside private spaces. But 2 of those 3 conditions are more recoverable than people think. You cannot rebuild the corner pharmacy. You cannot change zoning laws by yourself or redesign the streets in your subdivision. But you can use your porch. And you can manufacture the accidental contact that the old neighborhood produced by design. The research on this is recent, and it is specific. A 2019 study out of Brigham Young University found that people who reported having at least 1 conversation per week with a neighbor they had not planned to talk to had measurably lower rates of loneliness than people who did. Not even when controlling for total social contact. The unplanned conversation was not interchangeable with a planned one. It did something different. So tonight, try this. Sit outside, not in the backyard, the front, for 20 minutes. Not with your phone, just sit there and be visible. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple. But what you are doing is recreating a condition. You are putting yourself in the path of propinquity. You are giving the 3 houses on either side of you a chance to produce something the 1950s neighborhood produced without trying. You might know one more name by the end of summer. That is not nothing. In 1957, the average